Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm here in Sydney with Dr. Brendan Murphy. I'm going to be more informal this afternoon, Brendan, and just call you Brendan, but we thought it'd be a good opportunity for you guys to just raise questions. I know there's a lot of anxiety out there, there's a lot of different information out there, and it's important there to be an important source of factual information that you can rely on. So we thought it'd be just a good idea for Brendan and I to come together this afternoon and throw it over to you and for you to ask us some questions through the normal way that you can do through these broadcasts. And I'll ask particularly if there are medical questions. Well, the doctor's in, and if there are other questions you've got concerns about, whether it's how this will impact on the economy and what we're doing to try and support you and your job and of course the businesses to get through this virus. It will have a finite life. We will get through it together. But one of the ways we will get through it together is having conversations like this so we all know what's going on. So why don't I just start, Brendan, with the obvious question, which I think this is a virus that started out obviously in China. But how serious is the coronavirus for people living in Australia from a health point of view?
So the coronavirus is it's more serious than the standard flu, but it's not as serious as a lot of other nasty viruses that have been around like SARS and MERS, which we've heard about. For most people, the coronavirus causes a really mild illness, probably less severe than flu, but the reason we are concerned about it is because a small proportion, a quite tiny proportion really, of people can get seriously unwell, and unfortunately, as we all know, some people around the world have died. But for most people, particularly fit people who aren't elderly or don't have underlying disease, it's a pretty mild illness. We are concerned though about people picking it up if they're very elderly or if they're frail or if they have underlying diseases. But it's very important to notice it's not in the league of diseases like SARS or MERS. Yeah. It's nowhere near as severe as those really nasty viruses like Ebola.
And the first question we've got here, Brendan, is how can I protect myself? It says, how can people protect themselves?
So at the moment, there's nothing specific you should do other than if you're a return traveller, you've come back from a country where there is large numbers of cases, we want you to be very watchful of your health. Make sure that if you become unwell with any sort of respiratory symptoms, a cough or a sore throat or a bit of a temperature, go and get tested. Also, if you've been near someone else with the coronavirus, you're a contact, you know you're a contact, and you become unwell, also get tested. But there really isn't at this time anyway any transmission of this virus in the community. So you're not going to pick it up walking down the streets in general. And we have a little bit of community transmission in a part of Sydney, but that's pretty contained. However, it may come. We may get, and we probably will get, some more community transmission. So now's a good time to start practicing good hygiene practices. Yeah. Wash your hands regularly, after and before meals, after you go to the toilet. Be careful about good hygiene principles. Stay away from work when you've got a flu-like illness, even if it's an ordinary flu, which is more likely to be. Start practicing those things that we all should be doing, because that's the way, if this virus develops more community transmission, that we can prevent it spreading and delay it spreading.
So it's just a lot of common sense, really.
Correct.
At the end of the day. Now, Nikki has written into us, where do we go to get tested?
Yes, so
probably first, when should you go and get tested?
So there is no point getting tested unless you are a return traveller or you are a person who's been in contact with someone with coronavirus and you're unwell. So if you're perfectly well, you don't have any symptoms, any cold symptoms, there is no point getting tested. And if you've got a cold or a flu and you haven't been overseas or you haven't been in contact, there is no point getting tested. So there's no point people getting tested unless they fill those criteria. But if you do fill those criteria, you can call the hotline, and we'll put the hotline up on the Facebook page later. Find out where there are testing clinics. Every state and territory has set them up, and the Commonwealth setting them up. But your GP can also send you off to a pathology lab to get tested. But we really are encouraging people not to want to get tested unless there's a reason. It's only a relatively small number of people who should be getting tested at this time.
That's right. Well, Liz has sent through, do we have enough doctors and nurses? One of the things that the government has been working closely together with Brendan on and all of his team of all the health officers that are in all the states and territories, because there's quite a team that sits behind all of what you're seeing happen. There was someone like Brendan in each one of the states and territories that are advising the health ministers in your state, remembering the state governments run your public hospital systems and those health services. And one of the things we've been working on is to make sure that as this virus starts to grow and it comes from other places, and when Brendan talks about community transmission, that's when people in Australia who have contracted the virus here actually transfer that to each other. It hasn't come from overseas. It's happening genuinely here in Australia. Now, what we've been doing is looking at how that virus could affect more and more people, and to ensure that we understand what it might achieve potentially, and then knowing how many doctors and nurses that will require, or how many beds would be required in hospitals and things like that, sharing that information with the states and territories and making sure that we have enough support. Now, one of the things we can do to make sure that the health system keeps up is we slow the transmission of this virus, and we've been, Brendan, pretty successful so far, but that doesn't guarantee future success. That's why people have to express, common sense and how they get on about things. But today we announced $2.4 billion of additional investment. Now, that's from the federal government. That's dealing with everything from pop-up clinics and additional testing. It's an extra $500 million in extra support for hospitals. There's $100 million in there to ensure we get extra workforce to support aged care facilities, and also money to support very remote Indigenous communities as well, which we believe could also be very vulnerable. So we're putting a lot more resources in there to just check on that. Now, Narissa has said, where can we expect a medicine? When can we expect a medicine, or I imagine a cure, a vaccine for the treatments of coronavirus? But I also imagine that also goes to antivirals. Brendan.
Thanks, PM. So, coronavirus, it's important to remember that even if people get very severe disease with nasty pneumonia, which happens in about 1% of people, in a country like Australia, we do have very good treatments for severe respiratory conditions. We have some of the best intensive care units in the country. So we can support people through even quite nasty disease. That's really important, and we're preparing in case we do get people who need that sort of advanced treatment. But in the main, people are talking about drugs that might treat or prevent it. Now, there are what we call antiviral drugs. They're like antibiotics that we use for bacterial infection, but they work against viruses. At the moment, none of them are proven to work against coronavirus, but there's a huge number of trials going on in the world right now to see which of the many antiviral drugs that we have in our armoury will be useful. And we think some of them may well turn out to be useful. Again, we would only use them for those small proportion of people with severe disease. There's no point treating someone who's pretty well. Vaccines are probably going to take a while. Lots of good scientists are working around the world on vaccines, but to get a vaccine from the lab right through to human trials usually takes a year or more. But we're really putting a lot of effort into that, and Australia's at the leading edge of vaccine development.
Well, we put $30 million into that today as part of that package, and the Doherty Institute, which is down there in Melbourne, they are one of the world's leading institutes when it comes to viral research, and so Australians can feel very proud, and they're well known around the world. In fact, some major philanthropists from around the world have been donating also to the Doherty Institute, which was set up by the Commonwealth. Now, Raymond's got a great question. What's the difference between the flu and the coronavirus, COVID-19?
Great question.
Yeah.
So there are some differences. As I said, COVID-19 probably is a bit more serious in elderly people and people with underlying diseases than flu, although flu disproportionately affects people who are frail and elderly. Flu is more likely to be infectious before you get symptoms. COVID-19, more likely that you're only infectious for most people when you've got symptoms. Flu, actually, most people are quite unwell with it. Most people with COVID-19 actually have a milder illness when you're not in that serious group. Another really important difference is flu is quite infectious in little children and they can get quite sick. COVID-19 does not seem to cause significant disease in children as far as we can tell. We don't know whether they're being infected and just don't even notice it, or whether they're somehow less susceptible to it. But that's a really good thing about COVID-19, is that there has been very little clinical disease in children.
And now Linda has written, I think this one's for me, Brendan. It's not a medical one. She's asked, if you're a casual employee and your workplace is shut down, will you get paid? Well, if your workplace is shut down, that's one issue. But for those who find themselves not in employment because of the economic impacts of COVID-19, the New Start allowance is there for people who find themselves out of work. And I'll be having a bit more to say about this tomorrow, about some of the rules around that. But there are also things called sickness payments, and this relates to another question we get similarly for casuals. And if you find yourself and you're a casual employee and you obviously don't have the same benefits of those who are permanent or full or part-time employees, then there is a thing called the sickness payment under our welfare system. And again, we'll have a bit more to say about that tomorrow. But that provides the same as a New Start payment, and that would in the right circumstances potentially support people in that situation as well. But these are the practical things that I know people are going to be working through over the next several months. We don't really know yet, Brendan, how long this virus will run for. But we're not talking years. And I haven't heard anyone talk about this being around in 2021 at this point. But we'll obviously watch it closely, and the work that's being done all around the world. I mean, Brendan is on the phone regularly to our friends in the United States or the UK or in Europe or in Southeast Asia or in Indonesia or anywhere else. And we're learning as much as we can. Now, here's a good one. There's a whole bunch of terms that have come up during the course of anything like this, and doctors use them all the time. But for the rest of us, we mightn't know. Self-isolate is one of those terms, Brendan. What do they say when they're talking about self-isolate?
So self-isolation is a really important step to stop people transmitting this disease through the community. So at the moment, we're asking people who have been contacts of confirmed cases, or if you've come back from really high-risk countries, to self-isolate. Self-isolate means going home, keeping about 1.5 meters away from the others in your home. They can still be in the home. You don't have to kick your family out, but we don't want you to be hugging and kissing and handshaking and getting close. Stay about 1.5 meters away from your family. Don't go out other than perhaps to the doctor, and if you go out to the doctor, you need to wear a face mask. But we're actually setting up mechanisms now where your doctor can consult you over video conferencing. That's a new announcement that was made today. So don't go out shopping. Get your family or friends to go shopping for you. So it's really staying around the house. You don't have to wear anything special, but just avoid close contact with people in the house.
Yeah. Now, Regan has asked a question, will surgeries be stopped? Now, there are two types of surgeries, the essential service, emergency surgery, things like this. We're planning to ensure that all those services can be maintained. That's why we put an additional $500 million, which can be matched by the states and territories, to upscale and surge what the need will be because of coronavirus, particularly in our public hospitals and our public health system, whether that's supporting aged care facilities or places like that. But pardon me, but for elective surgery, obviously the state governments will be managing elective surgery wait lists and how they'll be managing the beds in hospitals, and that's been an important part of the work you've been doing, Brendan.
Exactly. So there's elective surgery is stuff that can be put off, and if you have a huge demand on hospital beds for people who are unwell, and again, important to remember, if we have a big outbreak of this virus in Australia or a series of sizable outbreaks, very few people will need to be in hospital, probably less than 20%, maybe only 10% of people. So we won't be having lots of people in hospital, but even so, if you had a big outbreak, that would put a big demand on our hospitals. So if that were the case and we had to put pressure on our hospitals, open a lot of extra beds, we would the states and territories have plans to put off elective surgery. That's fine, you can do that for a few months. Elective surgery is stuff that by its nature can wait. So it might mean that someone needing a hip replacement or some other operation that's not life-threatening can wait a few more months. And the people involved generally are very understanding of that. So the states and territories have good plans to put off elective surgery, but nobody's going to put off life-threatening surgery, important cancer surgery.
Right.
That will go on as normal.
And we'll keep funding the pharmaceutical benefit scheme and all of those drugs and medicines that you need. So all of those services will continue to have funding. I mean, tomorrow we'll make some announcements about what we're doing in the economy to support jobs and businesses stay in businesses to ensure that on the other side of this virus, the economy bounces back strongly. But when we announce those measures, all the other things we're doing on funding the National Disability Insurance Scheme and our record funding for schools and all of these things, that will continue. Now, we've got the last question here, very important question with this weekend coming up, and that is, will you consider locking down of public events? Well, I'm going to the NRL this weekend. I'm looking forward to the start of the season. Next week, the AFL starts. Last Sunday, a world record set for the Women's T20 World Cup final. And these issues, of course, are being looked at, but there is nothing at present. There is no advice from our health experts at state and federal level that is suggesting that there be any change to those locking down of public events. Now, you may have seen that happening in other parts of the world, and that's true in those other parts of the world. But here in Australia, where, Brendan, now we have, I think, just over 100 cases, and we've got about almost half of those which have cleared the virus or thereabouts.
Well, a lot of them are very well, and about 25 have completely cleared the virus. Yeah.
So people moving through it. So unless you yourself are in one of those circumstances that Brendan mentioned about having to have a test, you've been somewhere where you've been in direct contact with someone who'd be exposed, or you're exhibiting those symptoms and you've gone to get that test, or, well, you probably shouldn't go to the NRL this weekend or the AFL next weekend, but everyone else can. Kids can still play with each other down the road and have fun and do all that sort of thing. I mean, we should go about our lives in the same way as we normally do, just exercising that extra bit of common sense. That's important. We don't want this to sort of shut down our way of life here in Australia. We've got to be smart about it. But at the same time, we want to go out to restaurants. We want to go out and spend time with our friends and our family and be out there. That's good for the economy. That's supporting jobs. So we've got to show common sense about this. We've got to head early. We're going to work really hard to try and stay ahead. But we've got to keep our heads too, We've got to, maintain, I think, that sense of calmness that Australians are very well known for. Well, Brendan, look, I want to thank you for spending this brief time we've had. Hopefully that's answered some of your questions. There is the information line which we'll post up there, which you can call if you have any more particular questions about that. And the resources are coming in very quickly. The teams are working very close together. And remember, everyone, it's not just governments, it's not just your employers it is all of us. We all have a role to play as we work through this coronavirus and its impact on Australia in the months ahead. And if we all show that common sense, we'll all be good. Okay, thanks a lot, Brendan.
Thank you.